1. Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, AD 9. On September 9th, in the year AD 9, one of the most significant and devastating battles in Roman history took place in the dense, misty forests of northern Germany, the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. It was here that an alliance of Germanic tribes, led by a cunning chieftain named Arminius, inflicted a catastrophic defeat on 3 Roman legions commanded by the Roman governor Publius Quinctilius Varus. This battle would forever change the course of Roman expansion and mark a turning point in the empire's ambitions east of the Rhine River. The Roman Empire, under Emperor Augustus, had been steadily expanding its influence across Europe. The region of Germania, a land of dense forests, wild rivers, and fiercely independent tribes, had been brought under Roman control by the late 1st century BC. By AD 9, the Roman presence in Germania was significant, but fragile. The Romans believed they were civilizing a wild land, and Governor Varus had been tasked with overseeing the Romanization of the region, imposing laws, and maintaining order. What Varus didn't know, however, was that a storm was brewing among the Germanic tribes. At the heart of the brewing conflict was Arminius, a chieftain of the Cherusci tribe. Arminius had served as a commander in the Roman army, learning their tactics and strategies. He had earned the trust of Varus and was even granted Roman citizenship. However, Arminius was a man torn between 2 worlds. Though outwardly loyal to Rome, he harbored deep resentment toward the empire's domination of his people. Secretly, he began to unite the various Germanic tribes, who were traditionally disorganized and prone to internal conflict, into a powerful confederation. His plan was audacious: to lure Varus and his legions into a trap deep in the Teutoburg forest, where their superior numbers and training would count for little. Varus, confident in the stability of the region, was unaware of Arminius's treachery. In September of AD 9, Arminius convinced Varus that a minor uprising had broken out to the north and that the Roman legions were needed to quell it. Varus, trusting Arminius, agreed to march his army through the Teutoburg forest, a dense, narrow, and unfamiliar terrain that would prove disastrous for the Roman legions. As the Roman army entered the forest, their typical discipline and formation began to break down. The path was narrow, the trees were thick, and the weather turned against them, with rain turning the forest floor into mud. Arminius, under the pretense of scouting ahead, left the Romans and joined his waiting tribal forces. The Germanic warriors, knowing the terrain intimately, launched a series of sudden, vicious ambushes on the Roman column. The Romans, weighed down by their heavy armor and unprepared for combat in such a confined space, were caught completely off guard. For 3 days, the ambushes continued. Arminius employed guerrilla tactics, striking quickly from the trees and then retreating into the shadows before the Romans could organize a proper defense. The dense forest nullified the Romans' superior equipment and training, and their formations were useless in the tight, muddy terrain. The Germanic tribes, on the other hand, moved with speed and precision, their lighter armor and knowledge of the forest giving them the advantage. On the 3rd day, when the exhausted and demoralized Roman legions tried to break free of the forest, but Arminius had anticipated this and positioned his warriors on higher ground, blocking the Romans' escape. In a final, desperate battle, the legions were annihilated. Varus, seeing the complete destruction of his forces and unwilling to face the shame of capture, fell on his own sword. The few survivors were hunted down by the Germanic tribes, and the eagles of the 3 Roman legions, the sacred standards that symbolized Roman honor, were captured. The aftermath of the battle was a profound shock to Rome. The loss of 3 legions, nearly 20,000 men, was a catastrophic blow to Roman military prestige. Emperor Augustus was reportedly so distraught that he wandered the halls of his palace, crying, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." The defeat halted Roman expansion into Germania and forced the empire to pull back its frontier to the Rhine River, where it would remain for the rest of Roman history. In conclusion, the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest was not just a military defeat but a psychological one for Rome. It showed the limits of Roman power and marked the beginning of a long and uneasy relationship between the empire and the Germanic tribes. For Arminius, it was a personal victory, but his unity of the tribes was short-lived, as internal conflicts soon arose again. Nevertheless, he had secured his place in history as the man who stopped Rome. The significance of this battle resonates even today. It served as a reminder that even the mightiest empire could be brought low by a determined and united. 2. Battle of Flodden, 1513. On the 9th of September, 1513, one of the most significant and tragic battles in British history unfolded, the Battle of Flodden. It marked a devastating chapter in a centuries-long struggle between England and Scotland. The stage was set amidst the rolling hills of Northumberland, near the small village of Branxton. This would become the site of the bloodiest battle fought between these two kingdoms, a confrontation that changed the course of Scottish history forever. The early 16th century was a time of alliances and rivalries. Scotland, under King James IV, was allied with France through the Auld Alliance, a long-standing pact aimed at curbing English power. Across the border, King Henry VIII had ascended the English throne, a man known for his ambition and desire to assert England's dominance in Europe. When Henry invaded France in 1513, Scotland's treaty with France obliged James IV to invade England as a diversion, forcing Henry to split his focus. King James IV of Scotland was a bold and charismatic leader, renowned for his chivalry and military prowess. He led an army of over 30,000 men, comprising nobles, foot soldiers, and a range of mercenaries. His counterpart in this conflict was the Earl of Surrey, an experienced English commander tasked with defending the north of England while Henry VIII waged his war abroad. Surrey's forces were significantly smaller, with around 20,000 men, but they were seasoned veterans, and the terrain favored them. As James crossed the border into England, he captured several key fortifications, including the castles of Narm and Edel. His forces were emboldened, flush with early victories. James positioned his army on the high ground near Flodden, where they could see the approaching English forces. The Scots had brought with them powerful artillery and were well supplied, expecting a protracted battle. Meanwhile, the Earl of Surrey moved his troops with calculated precision. He cleverly maneuvered his army to outflank the Scots, positioning them on higher ground, a tactical masterstroke that would prove critical in the battle to come. Both armies spent days preparing, knowing that a major confrontation was inevitable. On the 9th of September, the two armies met in a brutal clash. The Scots, confident in their position and their superior artillery, opened the battle with a cannonade. However, their cannons were poorly positioned and ineffective. The English, on the other hand, had lighter and more mobile artillery that caused significant damage to the Scottish lines. James ordered his infantry to advance down the hill. The Scots fought bravely, but their long pikes, designed for battles on open ground, became a disadvantage in the soggy terrain. The ground was wet and uneven, making it difficult for the Scots to maintain their formation. The English, using shorter billhooks and swords, exploited this and broke the Scottish lines. The turning point came when the Scottish nobles, including King James himself, joined the fray. James, leading from the front, fought valiantly, but the English surrounded him. In the chaos and confusion, King James IV was killed, along with many of Scotland's nobility. His death marked the beginning of the end for the Scottish army. Leaderless and demoralized, the Scots were routed, suffering heavy casualties as they tried to retreat. The Battle of Flodden was catastrophic for Scotland. An estimated 10,000 Scots perished, including much of the country's aristocracy. The English lost far fewer men, around 1,500, but the psychological impact of the victory was immense. Scotland had been thrown into political chaos. The death of King James IV left the country in the hands of his infant son, James V, and a regency government that struggled to maintain order. The battle also demonstrated the importance of tactics and terrain in medieval warfare. The Scots, despite having the numerical advantage and superior artillery, were undone by poor positioning and the skilled maneuvering of the English forces. The Battle of Flodden was a defining moment in Scottish history. It marked the end of Scotland's medieval dominance and the beginning of a more turbulent era. While the country would eventually recover, the loss of so many nobles and the death of King James IV dealt a blow from which Scotland would take years to rebuild. The battle also solidified English control over the northern borders, allowing Henry VIII to continue his campaigns in Europe without worrying about the threat from Scotland. For both England and Scotland, Flodden was a reminder of the high cost of war and the fragile nature of power. 3. On September 9, 1941, a pivotal event in World War II began that would become one of the longest and most devastating sieges in military history, the Siege of Leningrad. The German army, along with Finnish forces, encircled the city of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, cutting it off from the rest of the Soviet Union. This siege would last for nearly 900 days, with the people of Leningrad enduring unimaginable hardships. The backdrop to this tragic chapter was Adolf Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union, codenamed Operation Barbarossa. The Nazi regime sought to destroy Soviet power and capture key cities. Leningrad, a major industrial center and the symbolic heart of the Russian Revolution, was a prime target. Hitler planned to obliterate the city and erase it from the map. Its location near the Finnish border also made it a natural focal point for Finnish forces allied with Germany. Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, who were locked in a fierce ideological struggle. German commanders Wilhelm von Lieb and George von Kuckler played key roles in directing the siege, while the Soviet defense was led by Marshal Kliment Voroshilov, later replaced by General Georgy Zhukov. Civilians of Leningrad, who would bear the brunt of the siege, also became unwilling characters in this tragedy. In the weeks leading up to September 9th, German forces had made significant advances into Soviet territory. By early September, they had effectively encircled Leningrad from the south and west, while Finnish forces blocked the northern approaches. The Soviets, well aware of the coming threat, scrambled to fortify the city. They built trenches, laid mines, and mobilized every able-bodied person to defend their homes. As the Germans advanced, they chose not to assault the city directly, instead opting for a blockade to starve the population into submission. The tactic was simple but brutal. Leningrad would be cut off from food, fuel, and supplies. In contrast, the Soviet strategy was one of stubborn resistance. Stalin's orders were clear: Leningrad must not fall, no matter the cost. On the first day of the siege, the Germans and Finns completed their encirclement, cutting off all land routes into the city. What followed was a grueling and horrific battle of endurance. German artillery relentlessly shelled the city, while Soviet forces tried to defend the limited supply routes, particularly the dangerous Road of Life across Lake Ladoga, which became the only lifeline for the city's besieged population. The climax of the siege occurred in the winter of 1941 to 1942. Temperatures plummeted, food became almost non-existent, and the people of Leningrad faced starvation. Thousands died every day, not from bullets, but from hunger and cold. The Nazi tactic of starving the city into submission appeared to be working. Yet, the people of Leningrad refused to surrender. Acts of defiance, like concerts and plays, were held even as the bombs fell. The siege dragged on for nearly 2.5 years. In January 1943, Soviet forces managed to break through the German lines in Operation Iskra, opening a narrow land corridor to the city. It wasn't until January 27, 1944 that the siege was finally lifted entirely. By then, over 1 million civilians had perished, many from hunger and the bitter cold. The Soviet victory in lifting the siege was a major turning point in the war. The aftermath of the Siege of Leningrad was one of profound suffering, but also of extraordinary resilience. The city lay in ruins, but it never fell. The endurance of its people became a symbol of Soviet resolve during World War II. For the Germans, the siege was a costly failure. Despite their efforts, they couldn't break the spirit of Leningrad or force its surrender. The Siege of Leningrad remains one of the most significant and tragic events of World War II. It was a reminder of the brutal tactics used by the Axis powers and the devastating human cost of war. The Soviet Union's eventual victory marked a key turning point in the war on the Eastern Front, and Leningrad's resistance became a legendary tale of survival against overwhelming odds. 4. On the 9th of September, 1900, one of the most dramatic and violent chapters in China's history was unfolding. The Boxer Rebellion had brought China to the brink of chaos, as a powerful uprising fueled by resentment toward foreign powers escalated into a full-blown conflict. In the late 19th century, China was caught in a grip of foreign influence. Western nations, alongside Japan, had steadily encroached on Chinese territory, setting up trade concessions, pushing their products, and, above all, spreading Christianity. For many Chinese, this foreign presence felt like a direct attack on their traditions, their way of life, and their sovereignty. Resentment festered, particularly in northern China, where farmers faced droughts, famines, and economic hardship. Anger turned to hatred, and that hatred found a voice in a secretive group known as the Boxers. The Boxers, formerly known as the Hechuan, were a loosely organized group of Chinese peasants, martial artists, and anti-foreign activists. They believed that through traditional rituals and the practice of martial arts, they could summon spiritual powers to protect them in battle. To the Boxers, the root of China's suffering was clear: the foreign powers, with their trade, missionaries, and modern weapons, had brought nothing but devastation to their homeland. Their slogan, "Support the Qing, destroy the foreigner," encapsulated their goal: restore China to the Chinese and rid it of foreign influence, especially Christianity. Inside the Qing dynasty, there was turmoil. Many high-ranking officials wanted to modernize and make peace with the West, but others believed that China's strength lay in its traditions. At the heart of this divide was Empress Dowager Cixi. Initially, she had been wary of the Boxers and their violent methods. But as foreign intervention became more brazen and the Boxers gained momentum, Cixi's stance changed. She saw in the Boxers a tool, one that could push back the ever-encroaching Western powers. With her backing, the rebellion intensified, spiraling out of control. In the summer of 1900, the most defining moment of the conflict occurred: the Siege of the Legations in Beijing. For 55 harrowing days, foreign diplomats, missionaries, and Chinese converts to Christianity found themselves trapped in the legation quarter, a walled-off area in the heart of the city. The Boxers, alongside Qing soldiers, attacked relentlessly, trying to breach the foreign-held zone. Inside, the situation was grim. Supplies dwindled, morale faltered, and both foreign civilians and Chinese Christians lived in constant fear of death. The defenders, soldiers and civilians alike, fought back desperately. Makeshift barricades were erected, and trenches were dug as foreign forces tried to hold off the siege. Recognizing the severity of the situation, 8 foreign nations formed a military coalition to intervene. Japan, Russia, Britain, the United States, Germany, France, Italy, and Austria-Hungary joined forces in what was known as the 8-Nation Alliance. This unprecedented cooperation among global powers was driven by a singular goal: protect their citizens, restore order, and crush the Boxer uprising. The alliance mobilized tens of thousands of troops, armed with modern artillery and superior military tactics. The conflict culminated in key battles like the Battle of Tientsin and the March on Beijing. Qing troops, alongside Boxer forces, fought fiercely, but their traditional tactics, relying on swords, spears, and their belief in spiritual invincibility, were no match for the modern weapons of the alliance. Foreign soldiers, equipped with rifles, machine guns, and cannons, moved systematically, capturing cities, securing their supply lines, and pushing ever closer to the heart of China. By mid-August, the 8-Nation Alliance had reached Beijing, and the Siege of the Legations came to a brutal end. The foreign forces overpowered the Boxers and Qing soldiers, looting the city and imposing harsh punishment on those involved in the uprising. In the aftermath, the Qing dynasty, already weakened by decades of corruption and foreign interference, was forced to sign the Boxer Protocol in September of 1901. This agreement imposed massive financial reparations on China, led to the execution of Boxer leaders, and allowed foreign troops to be stationed in Beijing. It was a humiliation that further eroded the Qing dynasty's legitimacy. The Boxer Rebellion, while crushed, left a long-lasting impact. It exposed the Qing dynasty's inability to protect China from foreign powers and deepened the growing sense of Chinese nationalism. In the years that followed, this spirit of rebellion would fuel revolutionary movements, culminating in the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1911. The Boxer Rebellion was more than just a conflict between Chinese rebels and foreign troops. It was a dramatic clash of cultures, beliefs, and eras. It marked the dying days of Imperial China and 5. On September 9th, we take a step back in history to one of the most crucial conflicts of early Rome, the Battle of Lake Regillus in 496 BC. This battle, steeped in both historical and mythical significance, marked a turning point in Rome's early expansion and its ongoing struggle with the Latin League. This date takes us deep into the turbulent era of Roman history, when the young republic was still consolidating its power after the expulsion of the Tarquin kings. The early Republic of Rome, newly formed after overthrowing the monarchy, found itself in a precarious position. The Latin League, a confederation of several Latin cities, posed a significant threat to Roman authority in the region. Relations between Rome and the League were tense, as both sought to dominate the fertile lands of Latium. The Latin League, however, also served as a refuge for Rome's exiled kings, particularly Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, who sought revenge for his removal from power. On this stage of conflict and betrayal, the Battle of Lake Regillus was set to unfold. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, the last king of Rome, played a significant role in the conflict. After being ousted, Tarquinius never gave up on his dream of reclaiming his throne. He aligned himself with the Latin League, using his political connections and the grievances of the Latins to rally support for his cause. For Rome, the battle was not just a fight against external forces, but a defense against the return of monarchical rule, embodied in the person of the exiled king. The threat of a Tarquin restoration loomed large over the Roman Senate, and the need to crush this challenge was seen as vital to the survival of the fledgling republic. The battle saw the rise of several key Roman leaders, most notably dictator Aulus Postumius Albus. In times of extreme crisis, Rome would appoint a dictator to lead its armies, a position that granted temporary absolute power. Postumius, chosen for his military experience and leadership, was tasked with saving Rome from a devastating defeat. He was supported by Titus Abusius Elva, his master of the horse, who played a crucial role in commanding the Roman cavalry. On the other side, Tarquinius and his Latin allies were determined to overpower the Roman forces, hoping to restore the monarchy and topple the republic. The Roman system of appointing a dictator was a reflection of the republic's pragmatic approach to leadership in times of war. Postumius was given supreme authority to manage the battle effort, with his leadership being seen as critical to achieving victory. This form of dictatorship was not a power grab but a temporary measure, intended to deal with the threat posed by both the Latin League and the exiled Tarquins. Postumius's decisive leadership on the battlefield became legendary, helping to cement the institution of dictatorship as an emergency tool in Roman governance. The battle took place near Lake Regillus, though the exact location remains debated among historians. What is clear is that the battlefield was of strategic importance. Situated close to the Latin cities, It was a key location for controlling movement and access to the surrounding areas. The terrain also favored cavalry movements, making it ideal for the Roman forces, whose cavalry would play a significant role in the eventual outcome of the battle. Like many battles in Roman history, the Battle of Lake Regillus is surrounded by myth. According to tradition, the twin gods Castor and Pollux, the Dioscuri, appeared on the battlefield, fighting alongside the Roman forces. Their divine intervention was said to have inspired the Romans, turning the tide in their favor. This religious element reflects the deep connection between Roman military success and the favor of the gods, a belief that played a central role in Roman culture and warfare. After the battle, temples were erected in their honor, further embedding this legend into the fabric of Roman religious life. The battle was fought with ferocity on both sides. The Romans, under the command of Postumius, used a combination of infantry and cavalry tactics to outmaneuver the Latin forces. One of the most significant aspects of Roman warfare at the time was their disciplined infantry formations, organized in maniples, smaller, more flexible units than the Greek phalanx used by the Latins. The Roman cavalry, led by Titus Abusius Elva, also played a crucial role, charging at key moments to break the Latin lines and disrupt their formations. The Latins, on the other hand, relied heavily on their alliances and the experience of the exiled Tarquins. Their forces were numerous and well-equipped, but they lacked the cohesion and discipline of the Roman troops. Their strategy involved a more direct approach, seeking to overwhelm the Romans with superior numbers. However, Roman discipline and leadership ultimately turned the battle in their favor. The battle was hard-fought, with both sides experiencing heavy losses. One of the decisive moments came when the Roman cavalry, led by Abusius, charged into the heart of the Latin forces, breaking their center and causing chaos in their ranks. This moment of bravery and precision was pivotal, as it allowed the Roman infantry to press their advantage and eventually encircle the Latins. The appearance of the Dioscuri, whether real or imagined, was also considered a turning point, inspiring the Romans to fight with renewed vigor. The Roman victory at Lake Regillus was decisive. It not only crushed the hopes of Tarquinius for a return to power, but also weakened the Latin League significantly. Rome emerged from the battle as the dominant force in the region, with its power solidified and its enemies in retreat. The defeat of the Latin League also marked the beginning of Rome's steady expansion, as the Republic gradually extended its influence over neighboring territories. In the aftermath of the battle, Rome sought to secure its victory through diplomacy. The Treaty of Cassianum, signed in 493 BC, formalized the relationship between Rome and the remaining Latin cities. While the Latins retained some autonomy, they were now firmly allied with Rome, marking the beginning of a long and complex relationship. This treaty was a diplomatic triumph for Rome, ensuring that the Latin League would no longer pose a significant threat and that the city could focus on expanding its influence elsewhere. The Battle of Lake Regillus is one of the most famous early Roman battles, thanks in large part to the writings of Livy and Dionysius of Halicarnassus. These ancient historians portrayed the battle as a defining moment in Roman history, filled with both historical facts and mythological embellishments. The inclusion of the Dioscuri and the legendary feats of bravery by Rome